Hey everyone, I'm Pierre XBT and I'll be making a guide today. I'm a challenger player on EU West and I want to make a guide on the most powerful build in the game. We'll talk about the knights and nobles. Everyone knows how powerful it is. I just want to show you how you may want to get there, as well as some of the transitions you can make in the situation that you don't find Kale, because that's one of the biggest problems. So basically with this build, if you manage to find Kale and if you manage to get your 6 nobles, you're aiming to get top 1. Like, you're going to be fighting to win the game. Obviously you need some good RNG to hit Kale, and that's when it's important to know how to transition properly, which is where most people struggle. That being said, if you do find Kale, you want to win, there's very few teams that can beat you. Maybe Void Sorks or Void Brawlers with a Jinx carry or something can do well, but even in the late game, if you high roll Kale too and everything is fully stacked at the late game, if two fully stacked teams play each other, then the noble player will always win. Nobles are the most powerful late game team. The only way 6 nobles lose, is if they haven't upgraded all their units or gotten the correct items yet. Otherwise, 6 nobles will win. It's that simple this patch. It's not the most fun thing, but that's the way it is right now. So if you want to climb the ladder, then I think this is a reliable build to try to climb the ladder with, because despite the fact that Kale is RNG and hard to get, everything else isn't. You'll be able to transition, as we said, and that will be the important part. Transitioning will be the most important part. We'll cover that in this guide today. To start off, let's talk a bit about the openers. I don't want to talk too much about when you should be leveling, how you should be rolling or spending your gold. There's a lot of other guides for that. Let's just cover some of the basic openers. When is a good time to actually pivot into this, because usually you don't want to force this every single game. You do want some kind of a decent opener. So what you want to look for are a knight's start in general. We got a few very good examples. If I start with some of these units, then I will tend to want to go into the nobles and knights tree. So we see we got 2 knights and 3 nobles here, 3 nobles and 2 gunslingers, and 2 knights and 2 gunslingers. We can get rid of the gunslingers later. So in order to get us to that mid-game, where we start looking for our carries, we need to find some early game champions who can use items properly and carry the items of our carries. So the carries that we will be looking for in the late game will be Draven and Jinx all the time, basically. So you want these 6 items. It doesn't matter who they are on, I just kind of put them on randomly here. But out of these 6 items, you want 3 of them on one of your carries. Very important. My personal favorite combination is these 3. So RFC, Infinity Edge, and Bloodthirster. Now, I'm not sure if it's the best. It's just what I personally like, so don't take my word for it. I've seen all 6 of these items on these 2 carries in Challenger ELO, so they'll all work. So in the early game, you want to be building these, and down here we've got some example of champions that can use it well. Nidalee can also work, Tristana could also work. There's a lot of examples of early game champions who could use these items well in the early game. You can also put it on one of your noble champions like Vayne or Fiora in the early game, and pick up some extra copies after you upgrade them to tier 2 in order to replace them later. So if you do put items on your nobles early game, make sure to pick up extra copies of them. Another thing is Lucian is a key unit in the early game. If you pick Lucian up early, that's a very good sign. You can put Luden's Echo on him, and that one item on Lucian is going to single-handedly get you through the early game. It will single-handedly win you a lot of rounds until level 6, basically. I finally need to give a pretty big shout out to Gangplank. Gangplank is both a blademaster and a gunslinger, so he fits very well into Draven and Jinx comps very easily. So when going for 6 nobles with one of these two carries, Gangplank is a key unit I'm looking for. I think he's also extremely powerful in this meta because these two are very powerful this patch. And we can stack items on him. He can be an amazing secondary carry throughout the entire game because he's going to hit the back line with his ultimate whilst these guys shred the front line. So the items I like to put on Gangplank. Red buff or Morellos, both are good. I think most people prefer Morellos. I personally prefer red buff because the autos also deal burn damage, though I don't think it makes a big difference. The important thing is to have one of the two. And then GA to keep him alive. He's got a game-breaking ultimate, very big ultimate. And a third good item on him could be Hush. I've also seen Runon's. I've tried it out. It works pretty well on him as well. But otherwise, I'd have 2 core items. It would be either red buff or Morellos and GA on Gangplank. So that's basically what you want when going for the Nobles comp. These are the core items you want to be building, and the core units you want to be looking out for, and the early game units you want to be transitioning into, basically. Obviously, there's going to be Kayle later, but as we know, Kayle can be very hard to find. Okay, so as I said, I don't want to talk too much about leveling or rolling strategies. You basically want to follow the standard plan, and you want to get to level 6 and roll, you want to get to level 7 and roll, and you want to find your Kayle. So whilst you're leveling up, you put the strongest team you can out into the battlefield, as usual, and just keep nobles in mind. If the nobles fit onto the main battlefield in the arena, then put them in. Otherwise, just leave them on the bench. Pick up any nobles you find and leave them on the bench, because we're going to need those nobles later. You don't need to try to 3-star them, but you do need at least one of each copy. The other things you want to be picking up are, as we already mentioned, going to be Gangplank, and finally, you want to pick up any knights that you come across. So if you come across any other knights, you want to pick them up as well. The reason for this is because even though knights probably won't be used in the nobles comp, you're only going to get your full nobles maybe half the time at most. I think probably maybe 1/3 of the time you're going to find a Kayle that you look for nobles. So it means that 2/3 of the time while you go for this comp, you're not going to get your 6 nobles. And this means that, like, if you don't have a transition plan, you're basically screwed in 2/3 of your games. You're going to tank ELO if you come bottom 8 every time you don't find Kayle. So that can't be a reliable plan. You need a backup plan, and the knights serve for that. We'll talk about the backup plans later. Right now, let's talk about what happens when you find Kayle. This is the game in easy mode, basically. You find a Kayle, you're very happy. You're going to get top 4 for sure, and you are going to be fighting for top 1 usually in this situation. You're going to try to win this game when you find Kayle. So if at level 7 you're going to be rolling down, you're going to look to hit 2 things: Kayle and your carry. So your carries will be Jinx and Draven. We'll cover Jinx first, and Kayle. If you find Kayle and Jinx, this is what your composition will look like. It's going to be 6 nobles, and you just pop Jinx in. This is a decent positioning. Nobles tend to spread out. It works really well in this meta too. So, as we said, these are the items for Jinx. You can have a Morellos on Garen or Leona. If you put a Morelos on Garen, I'd suggest picking up some extra copies of Garen. That way you can sell Garen and then pop the Morelos onto Leona later. Leona uses it very well. Meanwhile, at level 7, when you got 6 nobles with Jinx, you should have Gangplank on your bench. Unless you don't have Jinx upgraded to level 2, you could actually just have GP in there if GP is tier 2 and he's got more items. So basically, at level 7, if you find Kale, you put your 6 nobles in, plus one other unit. You try to get a strong team up that can hold you up. You hit such a big power spike at this point that you're going to be able to level up and eco from this point forward for quite a while. I've even had games where I could pretty much hit 6 nobles and go straight from level 6 to level 9. It's kind of that ridiculous how strong they are right now. But yeah, this is how your team could look like at level 7 with a Jinx. Obviously, you're looking to improve upon this team, so let's talk about some variations you could go into at level 8. Basically, at level 8, you just add Gangplank, and later in the game, if you find a Yasuo, you could put Yasuo in, and you could transfer GP's items onto Yasuo. Although GP2 might even be better than Yasuo 1. So you could wait to upgrade Yasuo to level 2 even, before switching in the Yasuo. So that is the variation with Jinx. Now let's talk about the variation with Draven. With Draven, you're going to be going with 3 blademasters. He'll be your other carry. Jinx and Draven share items, as we already talked about. You can interchange their items, basically. And with Draven, you want to go for 3 blademasters. And Gangplank, I think, is actually going to be better than Yasuo in this situation, because Gangplank gives a gunslinger buff to Lucian as well. However, if you get to level 9, then you could put in Yasuo and get like MF or Jinx at level 9. And now you'll have 6 nobles, 3 blademasters, and 2 gunslingers at level 9. This will probably be the strongest version of the comp in the hyper late game, basically. Or you could do 3 blademasters and just get like Swain. That would also be super strong. Basically, you have a ton of options, and the great thing about this comp is you will be able to get it to level 9 so frequently, because you're basically unkillable. And when you get to level 9 and you upgrade all of these units, you're going to win the game. So I think everything up to this point has been quite straightforward. Like, everyone knows what to do when they get nobles. You go ahead and win the game. Pretty easy to go from level 7 to 8 to 9 with 6 nobles when you find the Kale. What is hard is when you don't find the Kale, because as we mentioned, in a lot of games you're going to be low on health, you're going to be fighting to stay in the game, and you're not going to be finding that Kale. You're going to be rolling down and you're not going to hit the Kale. So you need to have a backup plan. And if you don't have this backup plan, you're basically screwed. So it's very important you have this backup plan. That's why you've been picking up these knights the whole time. And let's talk about some of the variations that you can play without Kale and transition into. So these are the pivots you want to look for. So we'll start talking about the Jinx pivots first. So this will be when you're rolling down and you're looking for either Draven, Jinx, and Kale, but you never hit the Kale, but you do manage to hit that Jinx. In this situation, you want to have your 4 knights out there. 4 knights, by the way, are also very good to just help you through the early game. Like in the early game, I didn't talk about this yet, but you could just have 4 knights plus Lucian, or 4 knights plus GP and Lucian. That would be really strong in the early game, or like 4 knights plus 3 blademasters or something to get you up to level 7. And then at level 7, you want to roll down, and let's say you get to level 7, you couldn't find that Kale, but you found Jinx. So that's great. You found Jinx, And because of that, it allows you to pivot into a different composition. And this composition will be with 4 knights, Jinx, Gangplank, because you've been picking them up, and you can find a Kindred, and you can just pop Kindred in, and now you've got 4 knights, Jinx, Phantom, 2 gunslingers. This is a pretty strong composition, and it's going to allow you to get to level 8. And at level 8, you can, like, this whole time, you can either keep your nobles on the bench, which is what you should do if you want to win. But if you're getting low on health and, like, you know you're not going to be looking for that Kale, you're not going to be looking for nobles anymore at this point, you can just throw all your nobles away, and you basically transition into this comp fully. And you use this comp to get you to level 8, where you can then become even more powerful. So at level 8, there's 2 versions I like to run. The first version is you basically get rid of Kindred, and you have 4 gunslingers now. So you by now, it's probably in the late game, it's after the Raptors, you passed the carousel, so you've given up on finding Kale by this point. You're transitioning into 4 gunslingers. And the 4 gunslingers you want are the 4 strong ones. In the late game, you want Lucian. So you throw away all your nobles now, but you kept Lucian because he's going to be important for this comp. And MF, you pick up MF at level 8, and you find 4 knights. If you do not find MF, then what you could do instead is you could use like 2 guardians and 2 gunslingers until you find MF, and then you could run something like this, basically. This will be a very strong team comp at level 8. Jinx is a very hard carry. You can also obviously switch out Sejuani. Maybe you throw away all your nobles, but then you find Kale at level 8. A bit late to switch into nobles now because you threw them all away, but you found Kale, so you can put Kale in as well, even though you can't go into nobles now. And this is a team comp that can get you a top 4 spot for sure. It's very strong if you get Jinx 2-starred. You're going to be very tanky, you'll have time to kill a couple units, and once you kill a couple units, Jinx goes online and she starts firing rockets and kills their entire team, so GG. This is another variation, like instead of getting 4 knights and 4 gunslingers, you could just have 2 knights and 2 guardians and 4 gunslingers as well. It's pretty much the same idea. I like to include guardians whenever in the late game we're not up against a lot of magic damage or hex tech. If I was up against magic damage or hex tech, I'd probably rather just keep 4 knights and 4 gunslingers. Okay, so now let's talk about the blademaster variations. The blademaster variations will be when you don't manage to get Jinx, but you do manage to get Draven. So it's important to note that Draven and Jinx are 2 of the most highly contested units right now. They are the 2 hyper carries in the game right now, and everybody wants to pick them up. So for this reason, you want to stay on level 7 and upgrade them, because otherwise, you know, there's only 13 of these units in the champion pool, and since there's 13 of these units, like, if there's 4 other players who want these same units, you're not going to find them, or you're barely going to find them. There'll be like 1 champion left if 4 people want a Draven, or 4 people want a Jinx. And like, you want to get them to 2-star. You want to upgrade the Draven, and people will also probably be denying these units, just like they were denying Cho'Gath last patch. So I would recommend to roll down hard to try to upgrade Jinx and Draven to 2-starred, and since these 2 units are interchangeable, I'd basically pick up Draven and Jinx. You can interchange the items, and then you put in the one that you upgrade first, and then you go with that comp from there. And that's why it's so important to keep the knights on your bench, and if you can't find Kale, you're going to be switching into a knights comp with one of your carries, basically. at level 7. So as we see here, we've got Draven, and you've got 2 other blademasters. Gangplank, your handyman, is here, and we got Fiora, the noble blademaster. This team comp will once again be very strong. If you can upgrade Draven to 2-star and you got this comp online, you're going to be able to use this to bring you up to level 8, where you can then once again be fighting for top 4. Maybe you can even transition into some top 1 comps, as we're going to see. So let's say you get to level 8, and you find Kindred and Yasuo. This is not my favorite variation, but Phantom Buff is strong, so you can just pop Phantom Buff in there, and that will just be an extra unit. It's still going to be 4 knights. You can find Sejuani. Let's say you find Yasuo, or maybe you don't find Yasuo at this point. You just have Aatrox. Aatrox will also work just fine, and this will be a comp that is very strong. You should be able to get top 4 with it if you have most of your units upgraded. Now, let's say you are at level 8, and what you could do is you could go hunting for Swain, because I actually think with Draven you can create one of the strongest team comps in the game that can actually do very well against nobles. If you get it, that would be 4 Imperials. But the thing is, it's hard to find Swain, obviously. So if you can't find Swain, then you could get 2 Guardians instead. So here we got 2 Guardians, we got 3 Knights, and once we find Swain, we'll replace this Darius with Swain. So we'll have 2 Guardians, 2 Knights, and then 2 Imperials. Maybe 3 Knights if we can't find Swain. And over here I put Gangplank's items onto Yasuo, although maybe we don't find Yasuo, GP will do just fine. Aatrox, I would rather use Aatrox as the 3rd Blademaster at this point, because once we find Swain, it will give Swain demon buff. So we want to be looking out for Blademasters. And finally we have one of the strongest team compositions in the entire game. It is going to be 2 Knights, 2 very strong Knights, Poppy and Sejuani. Ideally even Kayle if you find her. By this point you would have thrown away all your nobles for sure. And this team comp can beat nobles unless like the nobles is high rolling, basically. This is a very strong team comp for sure. You'll have your 3 Blademasters, you'll have Aatrox and Swain for 2 demons, you'll have 4 Imperials with Katarina and Darius, so your Draven is going to be a total monster here, and you'll have 3 Blademasters, and if you can find Yasuo for GP, that would be good too, though GP2, I still value GP2 over Yasuo 1. Actually, it's really close, but as we see, Yasuo 1 and GP2 are very close. And so this could be your team comp at level 8. It's going to be very powerful. You will find that you can actually win some games with this. You can even beat some nobles sometimes if they are not upgrading their team or managing the economy properly and stuff like that. So once again, I would use Guardians if I was against a lot of physical damage. Otherwise, I would rather be using a Knight's variation. And remember, before going to level 8, we want to upgrade our Draven or Jinx to 2-starred. And you can still keep your nobles on the bench until you either completed and you basically transitioned already into your final other team, you pivoted already, or until you're really low on health and you just give up on the nobles by then, because nobles is still the strongest team. If you get to this hyper late game and you play a stacked noble team plays against a stacked 4 imperial team, the stacked noble team will end up winning, unfortunately. That's the way it is right now. That being said, like these other pivots that I've shown you are very strong, and these are the teams you need to pivot into when you cannot find Kale, because the fact is you won't be able to find Kale every single game. But you can still get very good placings without finding Kale, as long as you can make good transitions into the other team compositions. So that's going to be it for my guide on the nobles. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, then give me some feedback. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'll try to get back to everybody. And if you liked it, I could also make some other guides on other builds that I use in Challenger ELO. I play quite often using the Void game tree, where we go into Void plus Brawlers plus either Sorcerers or Assassins. I also play with Elementals quite often. Elementals and Sorks, Ninjas and Elementals. So if you want some more of these type of guides, let me know, where I go into a bit more detail about the pivots. Otherwise, you can catch me on Twitch. I stream almost every day on twitch.tv/PRXBT. I will include the description in the link below. And please have a good day, everyone. Goodbye.